Hi guys, so on today's episode we talked to Dina Shale. Now she is in the UK and she founded the Way of the Horse. She had a bunch of childhood trauma herself, which led her to finding healing through horses, and then when she got that healing, she wanted to offer it to others, so she opened the Way of the Horse. And really what we talk about today is a little bit about her story, a little bit about the work that she does, which is really cool because it's not just with foster or adopted kids. She serves a lot of populations, but she does serve kids that have had early developmental trauma and children that are in foster care or have been adopted. And she doesn't just work with the kids, but she spends time working with the parents and using the horse to kind of show the parents how they're showing up in their parenting and allowing them the opportunity to go back and heal anything that they need to heal or they need to acknowledge that they're bringing to their parenting that might not be serving them well. So we do talk a little bit about inner child work, which I personally am a big fan of. So I hope you guys really enjoy this. She does a great job. Let's do this.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Britt, and this is the Stable Moments Podcast, the show where we discuss all things related to the foster care system and early childhood trauma, from foster parents, trauma experts, former foster kids, and beyond. We'll take a deep dive into the complexities of the foster care crisis in an effort to better understand how to fix it.
Yeah, so your program looks amazing.
Yeah, we're very proud of it. Thank you.
And you founded the program?
Yeah, I founded the business and then I've co-wrote the programs.
Okay, great. That's awesome. When you went into it, were you thinking of serving all people? Were you thinking of serving specific populations?
I think mainly people that have suffered in the same sort of way that I have. So childhood sex abuse, narcissistic husband, narcissistic parents. Do you want me to carry on with the list? So I'm a survivor through to thriving, but horses have really helped me, and I came over to America to do the training with Linda, and I also trained in the UK to be able to facilitate mental health and horses. So it's a real passion of mine, and trauma is a real passion of mine as well, because I personally think I don't belong to the same parents that I've got, because they're obviously nothing like me. And I do sort of think that trauma has a different effect on you, but I also think it is about mindset, because I certainly shouldn't still be alive after what's happened to me.
Well, it definitely develops a certain amount of resiliency, right? I mean,
yeah,
we look at some of the most successful people, like, you know, Tony Robbins or Oprah Winfrey, and they suffered tremendous childhood trauma. So I think that you get this resiliency of like, you've got nothing to lose, and nothing really can get you down any farther than what you've experienced before.
No. Do you know Teal Swan? Have you heard of Teal Swan?
No.
She is American, but she's quite big over here with this. She's got quite a few followers, and she's had a similar sort of experience to me. And I suppose that's why I connect with her and I understand her methods, and a lot of her work, when I watch it on YouTube, I'm able to understand it, because that is my life. I understand the process, and so I've processed a huge amount of trauma through my life, and it's how I've done it that is similar to her methods.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. It's so interesting to speak with somebody that's doing similar work in another country always. And, you know, I speak so often to, you know, an American audience, that it's nice to bring in different perspectives and understand different parts of the world. So thanks for joining us. I would love to start with just asking you a little bit about your history and how you got to be somebody that is offering equine services.
Okay, so my journey with horses came about at the very early stages in my sort of early years, sort of 7, 8, 9, and I first found my love of horses when I was very young. And then my parents sold the house and the horse had to go. So I went through my 20s, my early 20s, feeling sort of unfulfilled and like there was part of a jigsaw that needed to be filled. I started to read books and self-help books because I suffered quite a bit of trauma as a child, all the way from 7 years old. And I knew there was some healing that needed to be done, but I was looking for inspirational people and people I could aspire to be able to help heal the wounds. So I came across a book in my 30s, my early 30s, and the work of a lady from America. And I read her book and it inspired me to work more with horses and to be able to use the horses to help other people, because horses had really helped me in my journey. I went back to early 30s and my daughter started to ride at riding school, and I decided to buy her a horse and get back into equines because I felt there was something really missing in my life, and I really wanted to be more with nature, and I wanted to be around animals and be around the authentic part of animals and realize how much they could give to us. So I then went searching for inspiration through the books, and I came across this book and I was blown away by this book that was about a woman's healing with her horse, and she's got this amazing black horse, and I've always been drawn to black horses, and she found help and solace in this horse. And that sort of took me on a bit of a journey of learning about equine science and a little bit about the psychology of horses and how they, as a prey animal, how they're really important to us in our development. I also had a really nasty accident as well in my early 30s and had a bolting horse and got dragged. And that also led me to sort of learn a little bit more about natural horsemanship. So I took myself on a holistic journey, really, of learning with horses. And it really started when I was quite young. So they spread across my life, but not being in my life all that time.
Yeah, so you talked about some childhood trauma. So how do you feel like that trauma impacted you as a child, as a young adult? It obviously started to frame who you are today. So if you could speak to how it impacted you.
Oh my God, massively. I think it changes you as a person. It lives alongside you. I'm not convinced it goes away. I thought it might do in my 40s, but I think it lives alongside you, and it is always, your partner in your life. But I think it's how you manage it, how you process it, how you use it in your life. Some people use it in a negative way. I've turned it around and I use it in a positive way. I help people, and I also help rescue horses. We've got a charity that rescues horses, and I understand the process. And I think the impact that it has on my life is I don't know whether you could see it maybe from the outside, but certainly, from the inside, I know it's there, and it's something you think about all of the time. And I think it's a case of managing it. It is something you manage as time goes on. It is something that is always there, and it's how you manage it and how you. But I don't suppose I learned to manage it until I got into my late 30s, and that's a real shame because I couldn't find any solutions to how I was feeling. And I think people see you and perceive you as being a little bit different or a little bit strange because you react differently to things, and that's what is the triggers or the signs that people look for. But equally, horses react to that as well. So I've got a pony in particular I use with trauma children, she senses it and she has empathy with it. So I think anybody that is connected to energy and knows a lot about energy will recognize it in your body language and in your body, but equally the horses do. So horses recognize, because they're a prey animal, they recognize those things that are happening in you, and that was why I was drawn to horses.
Well, we have a lot of foster adoptive parents, a lot of program directors that listen to this podcast, and so you said that you didn't get around to being able to really heal this trauma until your 30s. So what does 15 to 30 look like when you're trying to make meaning of your world and you have maybe negative coping mechanisms? I don't know what you gained through your trauma that maybe didn't serve you, but what does that look like? The journey into adulthood when you're not really prepared for it.
Yeah, I think it either stunts your growth. It's a little bit like horses when they have trauma in the early years. It stunts their development. And I think as a child from that has trauma, I think it stunts your growth as a person and a natural growth because of the way that your body reacts to the trauma. And I think your development isn't at the same rate as everybody else's, which, we don't have to all keep up at the same pace. I think through your 20s, regardless of whether you've got trauma or not, you're looking to discover who you are, and you're also channeled by the way that society expects you to be. If you're, from a religious family or from a non-religious family, depending on what their expectations are, you're sort of going along with what is expected of you, and then you start to come against the obstacles, and it's the obstacles that then make you look at things in a slightly different way, or look for the answers that you might not have had before, because the patterns that you've learned to develop and the patterns that you've created as your coping don't always serve you right. So I thought that the way forward as a young woman in my teens was to be quite aggressive and quite assertive. And obviously that didn't serve me well going into my 20s and in a work environment, because I was very hostile to people and very standoffish, as an English word that we use, where you very much create a barrier around you and a boundary. And I think to teach you, and the strategies and the skills that I've learned didn't come from parenting, and it certainly didn't come from a work environment. It came from the horses and learning about how to have healthy boundaries and how to feel safe in an environment, but also listen to my own instincts that were right, rather than seeking that outside approval. And they're all things that I've learned over time. And I suppose, in a way, I feel like I've been lucky that I found the horses, because they've been able to give me that development that I needed. But I found it more later. Like I say, my development was really stunted because of the trauma that I'd been fighting with. So I feel like I've had time stolen from me in a way at times, because I should have known this 10 years ago. I should have found this 10 years earlier. But obviously I'm lucky I found it anyway.
Yeah. So walk me through a little bit of your journey, finding the horses, finding that book, and then going through the process of healing to get you to a point where you felt like you could serve others, right? Because we need to go through a certain amount of our own stuff, hopefully, before we turn around and share it with the world. So bring me through that process for you.
Okay, so I suppose I found the work that I do when I was in my 30s. I can't remember exactly, but probably about 15 to 17 years ago. So I was probably early 30s. And I started to read the books and started to feel like I'd found this thing that I was looking for. I wasn't sure what it was I was looking for, but I knew I felt unfilled. But when I found this, I felt like that moment. So I found a training course that I could go on that gave me an opportunity to go and work with people that could show me how to facilitate the work that I needed to do. So I knew that I wanted to help people with it. I knew I'd got some work I needed to do on myself, and I think that's ongoing. But I knew that I needed to find somebody that could give me the strategies that I would need to help myself, but also then help others. So I knew it was way more than riding or brushing a horse. And I felt that I found that, and I started on the journey actually of learning, and then my marriage failed. So that almost held me up a little bit. So I couldn't do my work because I wanted to set the business up 10 years ago, and then my marriage failed and I had to go back to work full time. So I almost had to get that out of the way before I could go and then work on myself to then learn how to help people with it. So the Way of the Horse, my business plan, was written about 12 years ago, and then I wasn't able to help people until I wasn't able to start my journey until sort of 6 years ago. So it took me 6 years really to again then I found the work, then had to wait, and then had to find somebody that I could then go and start my training with. And initially, sort of 12 years ago, this work wasn't in the UK. It was in Arizona in America, but it wasn't in the UK. So that would have meant me flying to and from the States to do the training. So in the UK, the work started to come about 8 years ago, and then 6 years ago I found it in Somerset. So I got myself on a course 6 years ago after I'd had a number again of failed work opportunities. You know, I had some very well-paid jobs and some very good positions, but I knew that life was still taking me in the direction that I felt I needed to go. So I gave up work and decided I wanted to set the way of the horse up, and I started on that journey, and then everything fell into place. It was almost like, this is the time, the time is now right. So my training started. I then booked onto another training course, and then another one, and each one fell into place at the right time. And then I found a piece of land, and I'd already got horses that I could use, and I started the journey, and then the work started to come in. It was almost like it all fell into place at the right time, but I had to learn many things along the way before the universe would allow me to start, and I also had to be ready. So I had to do my own personal development. The Apoda work is very much you go and do the work on yourself to be able to release your trauma, and then you're in a position then to be ready. And it really was strange how it all fell into place at the same time. It was the first time in my whole life that everything's fell into place so easily. So I went and did my training, and then in the meantime I was then running the Way of the Horse. So we found a site to run from. We had that for a whole year, and then we had to move because we then had grown out of the site, and then we moved on to another site, and another year later we'd outgrown that, and everything was falling into place. But it wasn't always as easy as it sounds. There was lots of ups and downs of learning and developing the business, and also developing the programs as well, which we developed on site. So we developed the Resilience program, which is what we use with foster children and their families, and also we do parenting workshops as well. And then we also developed the Project Pony, which is the rehabilitation of a human with a rehabilitation of a horse. So, you know, you get this shut down horse that comes in that has had abuse or been abandoned, all of the same things that the children are going to be going through or been through, and then they can see the rehabilitation or how in a mirror that looks to people on the outside. So you either get the horse that's in fight, flight, or freeze, or, you know, fight or flight, and then children can see how that looks from the outside. So in actual fact, you're not teaching to the children, you're teaching about the horse, which they don't need you to be specific and say, that's what you look like, this is how you look from the outside, this is what this animal's going through. And in a way, we are, you know, a descendant of an animal. You know, we originally were an ape. So you know, the programs have developed over that time, and now we're at year 5 going into year 6. So I'm a massive lover of learning about trauma, because I've experienced it and I've been through it, and I understand it from a survivor's point of view. But I'm always looking for new ways to learn about how it affects us in our body, and how it affects the horses as well, and how it affects children. Because obviously, having had trauma from a very young age, I do understand that there is a lot of things that I do as an adult that reflect back to me as a child. So that was that too long, or?
No, that was perfect. So with the families that you serve, families that are either kids that have early developmental trauma, now do they usually come by themselves? Do they usually come with family members?
So we normally get referred from, we have a couple of companies over here in the UK that refer people in, and they usually come with their adoptive parents. But I always work with the adoptive parents first, because what I've learned over the years is that people are wanting me to fix the child, where it's more about working with the whole unit. So I always work with the parents first, and we do our workshops. We look at how trauma affects animals without the children being there, and how animals do a very similar sort of thing to us, and how we can also look at children from a trauma point of view in a different way. And then I start the Resilience program, which can be either 6 or 10 weeks long, depending on the age of the child, because of their learning ability. And we try and work particularly with my trauma pony, which suffered quite badly at the hands of some brutal men when she was younger, and she's at 25 now, so she's the safest pony in the world, with children especially, but she won't work with men. So she's particularly good with children, and she recognizes trauma straight away and will approach the children as soon as she meets them, and there's total empathy with her. So yeah, we get people in, and we work with the adults first, and then the children, and then we bring it all together. So there's a combination of how we do the programs.
I love that, because I was a post-adoption social worker, so I would go talk to adoptive parents, and a lot of the time I would get parents that would kind of report, this is what they did wrong, this is what we're dealing with, they're lying, they're stealing, they're manipulative. And, you know, over time, I really learned that the parents are going through a whole bunch of stuff too. I mean, they may be grieving their ideal family. This child has now given them, you know, secondary trauma. So I realized I actually had impatience for parents in the beginning of my career. And then I realized how important it was that we treat the parents with the same trauma lens that we do the kids. So I love that it starts with kind of getting the parents on the same page and giving them the trauma lens or the perspective, but that you do it with the horse. So it doesn't seem so personal, because when you're talking about, you know, a particular child that's brought you through a whole bunch of hell, you know, it can be just too close to home for you to look at it objectively. But when you use the horse, you can start to make those connections without such a personal connection. So how do you see the parents react to that work?
Well, I mean, we've had amazing results with working with the parents first, because they sometimes don't always look at things in a different way, and you're being less specific or pointing the finger in a naughty way, because you're using the animal to teach through rather than to them. Because a lot of people, and we used to call it the parenting workshop, and people hated it because they felt that the barriers went straight up to begin with, and people were thinking that you were going to be teaching them how to what's the saying, teaching a suck eggs, is it, what's the saying, you're teaching a parent how to be a parent, and that's not, that's not what we're about. We're teaching them how to look at things in a totally different way, and also to look from a point of trauma. A lot of these kids are calling out because they're not being understood, and they've got trauma, and they need to be actually in a calm and relaxed zone to learn. So when they're in their high anxiety zone, which is what animals are when they come into us, for instance, in the rescue centre, you see them in the what we call the anxiety zone or the panic zone. Therefore, the kids won't learn in the same way like you would be trying to teach a horse to become soft. The horses aren't going to learn unless they're in what we call the learning zone. Very often, you see with the parents that the children are in the anxiety zone. So therefore, you have to gain that trust with them first. But we do teach it, through the animals, and when we show them what we call the emotion scale, people understand then what it is that is happening with the child and the behaviours and how it's affecting their family unit and also the child. So they get more benefit by learning that the child then comes into the learning zone, and then they can get the teaching into them. Once the children are calmer and not anxious, it changes things, and they move forward much quicker as a unit.
Right. There's no, you can't expect a child to learn anything when they're in that brain. So can you tell me, is there any specific examples or moments that you can remember where a parent was like, this is like my kid, or those moments where you realize it's clicked for them?
Yeah, I've got quite a few that I can think of. We've got a client that's been coming to us for a couple of years, and we had them in on the parenting workshop. And it's when you see that moment in their face when you talk about, the way that their child reacts or the behaviours that they've got when they're in this high anxiety zone. That the parents actually realise that there's the similarities between an animal and a human. And, these foster parents that we've worked with have been foster parents for not just, 1 or 2 years, but probably 10 or 20 years. And when they say, we've had training through the foster agency or the adoption agency, but we've never learned anything like this, that's when you know that your programs are way in front of their time, because this isn't how you should parent. This is looking at it from a different angle, and then when they go away and they use their knowledge with their unit at home, you then get the text saying this really worked, or that really worked, or I love the way that we did this. And we use the methods on the yard as a whole. So all of our staff use the method of the emotion scale with the horses, and we talk about how the horses are affected and what number they're at. And the same with the parents. We want them to talk in that language with us, where they're looking at the behaviours of their children when they've changed their behaviours at home as well. So it's not just about the child changing their behaviours, they're the child. It's us that need to change as humans and as adults and leaders. And we should look at our own, what's being brought up in ourselves when the children react in the way that they do. So you know, the program, the parenting program is 2 hours, and we can't get enough into that program. There's so much to learn that it does sometimes go on over that, 3 or 4 hours, but there's such a lot to learn for them to take away. So it's almost like they have a lesson first before the children come in, and then we start looking at the behaviors that the children have created when they're with the horses and how different they are with humans. So it just shows that children feel much more relaxed with an animal, whether it be a horse, a dog, sheep, or a chicken, or whatever we've got. Children do behave very differently, and I normally say it's session 3 or 4 that they'll start to see the big changes.
Yeah, and horses are so amazing at showing us our energy. So just mirroring for us what we're bringing. So if you're going to walk into a round pen with a horse and the horse is walking away from you or having a negative reaction, then you can say, like, how do you think the horse is responding to you? And the parent can realize, like, what type of energy they're bringing to the situation. And I think that you've talked about, no, we're not teaching you parenting. We're just like giving you another perspective. But it does feel like, it feels a little bit like offensive to feel like I've put myself out there. I'm going to allow a child into my home. I'm doing good things, and like still be told, like, you need to change. And I can get why that would feel the way that it does sometimes, but it ends up being easier, because rather than like pushing against something to make the relationship work, you realize what you can let go of, and it starts to feel like relieving and a release of pressure and all those things that horses love. And your parenting becomes easier. It's not like it's not to be looked at as like this mountain you have to climb, and that it's going to keep being. In fact, if you don't do the work, it will continue to be this mountain that you have to climb.
Absolutely. But people have got to be searching for those answers themselves. They've got to be looking for a different way to be around their children and their foster children. And just because, maybe they've had children themselves and then they've got foster children, it doesn't mean to say that those children are all going to follow the same path and they're the same pattern. I've got 2 children. One of the things that is important for you to know is that I've got 2 children, and both of them are in the 20s. I've got a son who's older and my daughter who's younger. And my son was very challenging as a young person, and way more challenging than my daughter. And what I realised was that he is very sensitive and very in tune with energy. But as I'm bringing my children up, trying to be the best mum that I can, but remembering that I don't have any parents in my life that are giving me any role models. I haven't had any parents in my life since I was 16, and I was made homeless at 16. So I've not had any role models to follow. So I did the best thing that I could in the best way I knew to be around my children. I knew I didn't want to be aggressive and violent, but I knew that I hadn't got the answers to help my son, because he suffered with his education and was very highly emotive and was very emotional and suffered a lot with anxiety. And I think it came partly from the trauma he had as a child, as a baby being born. We had a very traumatic birth, and he was taken away from me for the first week. His behaviors were very challenging as he was getting older, and to a point where at 14, it was such a big, massive challenge. It then split my marriage. But one of the things that I learned since my marriage split and through this work was how my energy and my feelings affected him, to a point where I put that to the test a couple of years ago, because what I didn't realise was that he was very in tune with energy and animals and me as a mum. He could read me if I was trying to hide things. So he was not using a mirror, but he was telling me things about myself that I had to learn. And the reason that I know that he does this is that we learned how horses do body scanning in my training, and how horses read us. And my daughter had a car accident 2 years ago, and she was upside down in a ditch, and we had to go and fetch her out this ditch on a snowy day. And we took her to the hospital, and I watched my son square into my space and come into my space and come straight, face onto me. And I watched him do this body scanning. And I would never have known that that was what it was unless I'd done my training. So I was able to completely calm my energy and take the panic aspect away that would have been there many years ago where my heart might have been beating, because he could recognize that. He could recognize the energy in my energy space, but also the way my heart was beating. Fortunately, I was able to take the panic out of the situation and completely calm my energy and my heart rate down. And he was then came down on his emotion scale and calmed right down. So that really made me, it proved to me that these methods really do work, because I was able to do something that I'd never been able to do before. And he was 20 then. And in the 20 years before, I always tried to hide my emotions and feelings and tried to be the brave one and put on a brave face, and it didn't work. And it didn't work this time, but I was able to change the pattern of my behavior and do something in response to his reactions and calm a situation down in the same way we would do with a horse that was in that dominant situation maybe, or wanted to be in a fight situation with us. How you use your energy in your body has an effect on them. And we use this same sort of method with dominant horses and dominant children, or young lads particularly.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And it really gives a great perspective for parents entering any of this work or that are already in this work, because regardless, we are going to get triggered. Like, it doesn't matter how many books you've read on trauma, how many foster kids you've had in your, it's an ongoing work, right? Like, you need constant wellness and constant tune-ups, and then you need to redo the process every single time it's a new person, because a new person brings new dynamics. And we never know, these little like pings of anxiety, or when we notice our engine running hot, those are all opportunities for us to work on our stuff. They're like little gifts of like, if you'd like to work on your stuff, it's here and it's ready to work on. And it's really easy for us to say, yeah, no, it's Billy's fault. Or if this wasn't around, or if this person wasn't around, or if this situation didn't happen, then I would be fine. But the truth is, if you're not able to deal with those situations in the way that's effective, then it's something within you that needs to be worked on. It's not a blame or a bad or a good or anything. It's like, it's humans. So being able to, one, go to a place that's fun and engaging, but also where you can work with an animal where it doesn't feel so, like face didactic, you're like talking to somebody face to face. And also just realize that it's always a process, it's always okay, and it's really just like a mental health check, and you get better and better as you practice. But unless you're willing to like jump in and say, oh, this is one of those opportunities. And the horses do it too. I mean, we get frustrated with horses. We realize our whole agenda has gone to crap and we're not going to be able to finish any of it. Or, there's times when we just get frustrated or get upset, and that's the work. Where we go like, oh, right, like this isn't all about me and my day and what I had planned and all of that. And we need to stop and work on the actual issue, whatever it may be. And that's what natural horsemanship teaches, where it could take 3 hours, it could take 3 days. And it's very much the same approach that we have to take with kids. And I think it's not supernatural, but it's natural for us to be triggered all the time. And it's really just how much are we willing to lean into those triggers so that we can show up better in our lives.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think working on yourself is an ongoing project. There will always be something new. Like you say, there'll always be a new horse that arrives that will teach you something that you've never learnt before. And it's the same with young people and children. And you know, I have it with staff as well, where there's always something to be worked on with staff. And I think it is an ongoing process, and it's something that you have to be open to. You have to be willing to be an empath and want to learn and be open to change for the better, and not shut that off, because you just don't have a growth mindset otherwise if you're not open to. It's like running a business. You know, you've got to look at different avenues to be able to develop your business, and not just have a one track mind. And it's very similar to some of the traditional learning horse. I'm trying not to give the name away, but in the UK we have a horse riding establishment with a name that is a traditional method of being around horses. And for me, I think you need to look outside of the box, because not every horse is on that one track. Just because they tell you to do it this way, it's got to be done this way, this same way with every horse, and you've got to learn to ride it this way. They don't see the animal as being a sentient creature, and they are a sentient creature with feelings and emotions, and they process their emotions in a similar way to we do. And everybody needs to think outside of that box sometimes and look at horses, that not every horse is the same, and not every human is the same, and not every horse and human is the same, or that partnership. So it's the same with children when they go into the foster homes. You know, they may, you know, connect with that foster family and it works, and then there might be another one that comes in and it doesn't, and you've got to look outside the box at the training methods, either with the animal or with the child, as to what is best for that new combination.
I love that. I really love that. Tell me a little bit, I know we had talked about it before we started the interview, a little bit about inner child work, because I feel really strongly about this idea, and it's not just tactics of like breathing or noticing when your body's high, or, you know, running high, and regulating your energy. It's not just like things you can do today that are super practical. There's also some inner child work that I think all of us should do. Can you talk a little bit about that, and if you bring that into your sessions?
So obviously the trauma that I sort of specialize in trauma just because I'm fascinated by how it affects us, and also obviously, you know, I'm always looking for the next thing to help with trauma. I'm a firm believer, after obviously my childhood experiences, that the talk therapy didn't work for me. So very often I get quite upset when I think adults are trying to push children into talk therapy when they're not ready. And one of the things that my work has taught me is that you deal with the trauma as it appears. We don't go back digging for the trauma, because the trauma, as we've already experienced, and we don't want to go back and re-traumatize ourselves by talking about what actually happened to us as young children. And also, and that's why I love the work that I do, because it brings to the surface what your body naturally says, right, this needs to be healed right now. And one of the things that I've learned about is this inner child work, which I have done myself to help me with my trauma, because it takes you back in your life, but not to you reliving the trauma. So it takes you back to the feelings of that time, and you work with the small Dina, let's say, and you go back and you feel how you felt at that time, and you're not reliving that trauma. You are going back to that how you felt at that time, and that can help release some of the traumas of that time without reliving the terrible things that you've already experienced once. And I have done that, like I say, and it's really helped me to connect with that time in my life and remember how I felt, but also to remember the pain of that time, but also to put nice memories back into the work that I've done with the inner child work in reconnecting with the small Dina.
Yeah, I love this inner child work so much. This is something that I recommend for the parents, the program directors, service providers, adults typically, but when it isn't going back and reliving your trauma, like you said, but there's sometimes when I go like, okay, I notice an opportunity. I've been anxious for the last 3 days. Something's really wearing on me. I start asking questions, what is this anxiety about? Where is this coming from? And then I can start to discover a time in my life that maybe I felt this way. And when I go back to that little Rebecca, we'll call her, like I can sit with her and realize what she needed, and I can hug her and I can honor her and I can love on her and say like, wow, somebody should have been there for you. Somebody should have protected her. That, wow, look, this amazing accomplishment you've done by becoming the woman you are today, or telling that girl where she's going to be. So really like pouring into that little girl in the way that she needed to be when she wasn't given what she needed. And it's just honoring, like we want to be tough, I get it, and we want to steamroll over these things, and we want to, it feels a little weird sitting next to our former selves, right? But I feel like if we can honor those former selves, we can give ourselves what we didn't get. And that's incredible to be able to take back that power, and to be able to heal ourselves by going inward. So if listeners haven't heard about this kind of idea, do some research, and I totally think that this would help a lot of people heal, because all of these things that we have, every time we have these negative emotions come up, they're attached to something. We've learned something's come online during the course of our life that says this is a threat, or to behave in a certain way, and that's when our coping mechanisms come up. And I can relate very much to how you said some of your coping mechanisms were being aggressive. I don't know how many times I've been told you're intimidating, and I'm like, oh, and I'm the most caring person, but I have to understand that sometimes I'm intimidating, and those are coping mechanisms that I've created. So I love that. Do you see your program ever becoming longer? Like when you said 2 hours for the parents, I'm like, oh man, I could see this. And I know funding is always an issue, but I'm like, I could see this being a longer program, or do parents ever leave and say like, oh, I wish I could do more time here?
Yeah, we get that a lot, and we're moving site at the moment, so I'm hoping to develop more of those types of programs, because I certainly know it's needed, and it's been very welcomed by, like I say, even foster parents who've had children for up to 20 years. So they're learning something new that even they didn't know was available to them. It's just funding in the UK. The funding is hard to come by, but we are running our Project Pony, which is the rehabilitation of an animal alongside an adult, with the National Lottery over the next 3 years, and each cycle of the programme that we run is up to 6 months. So they get one full day a week, so between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. On site with us, and they get that for up to 6 months, so they get that support, and we have got some foster carers on that program that teaches them new methods, which then filters down into the children, whether that be their own biological children or foster children or adoptive children. I have got one lady that came on the trial of Project Pony before the National Lottery funded it for the 3 years. She came on it for 6 months with me, and she had the most aggressive adoptive child, and she was at breaking point. She was, just to speak to her, she was at breaking point and crying every day. And she said to me, "You've changed my life, Dina, because you've changed my son's life as well." And when people say that to you, it really does make your hair stand on end. You've changed a person's life, and that in turn has changed that child's life. Now, she was the one that wanted me to have her child and fix him, where I did the work with her over a 3-month period, and I changed her and him.
I love it.
So, that was the result.
It's interesting it would be interesting I love data, but it would be interesting to survey just adults in general and say, or parents in general, and say, how much of you believe that you have your own stuff that can be healed and worked on. And it'd be interesting to see how many people are willing and open to it, because the more we can heal our own stuff, the more we can show up for others. And it's in no way is it taking care of ourselves, taking away from others. It's giving back. So it's interesting, but I'm really glad that you have the space. There's a lot of programs that do just speak to the kid, and a lot of that comes down to even funding. I know when I had kids on my caseload, there was a lot of parents that needed guide, they were asking for it, and we're like, oh, well, the state's only paying for your kid, so because that was the kid that was in the state's custody or whatever. So I think that I know in the US the system is getting a bit more holistic, starting to look at the whole family unit. But yeah, I'm just glad that your facility has a space and recognized how important it is to start with the parents.
Yeah.
Oh, I love this. So you've been at this for how many years?
We're going into year 6 now.
6. Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you got the funding that you got. And, I really hope that this work just becomes more and more accepted and available and seen as valuable, because I just don't know how effective talk therapy is for this population and for a lot of people.
I think I'm hoping that post-COVID, that most people will look at more holistic type therapies, because we are safer outside, and I'm hoping that people are going to be drawn to this type of work. At the moment, still in the UK, I think we're 15 years behind you guys. I think people don't always see the benefit of being around animals and nature. So I'm hoping that COVID has cleared the path, so to speak, so people found more nature in their lockdown and being around animals. I know we've seen more people come across our site because we've got a public footpath across the site. And I'm hoping that more people are drawn to realise how nature has benefited them at this time and how they need to look that up. I've got another meeting in half an hour, so I need to sort of start closing. I've got somebody waving at me.
Sure. So, so in the UK, what is the foster care? Is there a crisis over there? Do you have a lot of kids going into care?
Yes, we have a lot of foster carers that have got children. There's a lot of children in what we call here children's homes. There's a lot of children in crisis in the homes. I deal with lots of children in not just in foster care or adoptive care, but also in the children's homes. I think there's also a lack of support as well for the parents, and that's why I've developed that parenting program, because again, it comes back down to, we're not trying to fix the children, we're trying to help the whole unit. And there's a crisis really in support for parents, because very often the issues that shows up with the children is bigger than maybe that adoptive parents knew about or thought that they were gaining.
So what are your thoughts on how we're able to stop kids from coming into care?
I think it's a pattern, isn't it? I think you learn from your peers, and I think bad habits roll over into bad habits. So I'd like to see, it's a bit like animal welfare. I'd like to see things happen sooner rather than leaving everything till the last minute, until there is no resolution with the family unit and the children are taken into care. I'd like to see more solutions in place before it gets to that stage, and working initially, because I think people don't realise the impact that taking the children away from their parents has on them. I've seen it from different angles, you know, on lots of occasions where the children really would never benefit from being with the parents, and they're not taken away early enough. And I've seen it where we could have worked with the family better, and the children could have not had that trauma of being ripped from the biological parents, and we could have solved the problems within the units. Like I say, I try and save some of them, but I can't save all of them, and it's the same with the animals. I want to save all of the animals on the planet and stop them all from having that trauma and that suffering, and I don't think you can save them all, but you can be there for some of them to support and change their lives.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I absolutely love what you have going on, and I'm so glad we connected. And I'm glad that the UK is doing more and more animal therapies and thinking outside the box. And I know that a lot of these, well, Facebook and a lot of these like international associations and stuff are just, I feel like are connecting us all a little bit more. So I'm really grateful for that. But thank you so much for all the work that you do, and using I think that everybody's path is for a reason, and you being able to use your childhood trauma for something amazing that's going to help so many lives, I think is so valuable and is totally for a reason.
Yeah, I totally agree too. Took me many years to realize it, but yeah, I totally agree.
Well, thank you so much, Dina. I will link to your website so that people can
Brilliant.
So that people can check you out when we share the podcast, and I will let you know when it's live so that you can watch it.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, and you. Thank you very much.